From the floor of OpenInfra Summit in Paris, we are seeing a big shift in how organizations think about virtualization. With VMware's future uncertain, many organizations are exploring open alternatives to modernize their infrastructure, and OpenStack is emerging as a top choice. And today we have with us Jimmy McArthur, Director of Business Development at the OpenInfra Foundation, and Ken Crandall, Senior Strategic Project Manager for OpenStack and Kubernetes at Rackspace. Jimmy, Ken, it's great to have you both on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
You both gave incredible demo at the summit earlier today. Tell us about it.
I did the demo showing a migration of a virtual machine running in a VMware infrastructure to OpenStack. And more specifically, it was a VMware infrastructure that's sitting in a data center, and it was moving to our OpenStack public cloud called OpenStack Flex, running 5 states away and about 1,400 kilometers away from where the actual data center was.
When I cover this story here, a lot of TFIR organizations are planning or migrating away from VMware because all the challenges that they're facing after the Broadcom acquisition. Can you talk about what kind of alternatives are there for those looking for alternatives of VMware? What kind of trends you're noticing in those conversations?
Well, I can tell you, we learned from Forrester in a report that's coming out hopefully quite soon that folks that are running VMware workloads, their number one alternative is an open source solution. And that's why we're putting so much emphasis on these OpenStack demos and VMware migration to OpenStack. And also, I think we're looking at, Gartner said that VMware is going to lose 30% of market share by 2029. So those are big numbers. And I think companies like Rackspace are well positioned to pick up those numbers and really show a different type of cloud native and cloud solution.
And I would add to that one of the attractions that kept customers on VMware was being able to run in their own data center or run in an environment where they felt they had control and visibility into their data and their compute infrastructure and whatnot. But now, and when we started out 15 years ago, we were just at the nascent beginning of cloud as well. So as we were rolling out OpenStack, we were also having to educate users about cloud. And so you fast forward 15 years to now, the OpenStack people are realizing provides the advantages that they're used to from cloud. So a lot of the types of things like API first, thinking in terms of resources rather than in terms of virtualized hardware and other things like that, are not new concepts. But now being able to do that in their own data center or in a partner data center or in a location where they have that visibility and that control is starting to be really appealing. And I think we're sort of in the second kind of migration to cloud, but instead of going to a hyperscaler, it's going to be to something more localized.
Just add on to that, this is something we talked about in the demo today. Ken brings up a great point, which is that customers that are on VMware today haven't looked at anything but VMware for a very long time. And OpenStack has matured dramatically in the last 10 years. Upgrades are easier. There are more providers in the ecosystem, more organizations to help them make that transition, more migration tools. So I think it's a good opportunity for companies to take another look at OpenStack.
Now, when I talk to folks who are looking at VMware alternatives, they have different set of challenges. When you talk to folks here, what are some of their pain points as they look at OpenStack as VMware alternative?
I would say that in general, at the big end, it's funny, at the big end of scale, there's fewer problems because people understand the nature of IT running at scale. It's as we scaled it down into something that would be, the departmental, small, medium business in those areas, especially where VMware has excelled over the past, over the past few years, those have been the areas where we struggled the most. And so What's really interesting with the modern kind of OpenInfra blueprint of combining OpenStack and Kubernetes and Linux into an infrastructure that can actually scale down before where it was before. I mean, when we were talking about OpenStack clouds, 10 years ago, we were talking about, control planes of anywhere from 3 to 10 machines just to run control plane, right? And that's before you start inserting hypervisors. You go to talk to a VMware user and they're like, what do you mean I have 10 machines that aren't doing any of my workloads? And because they've just sort of much taken that control plane concept for granted with vCenter. And what you're seeing now is not only is OpenStack kind of scaled down to be able to address those particular use cases, you're also seeing the evolution of VMware to become more cloud-like. And so as Broadcom launches, vSphere 9 and they start going in that direction, they're actually making vSphere look a lot more like OpenStack. And so you're seeing kind of the confluence of ideas of what is meant to be private cloud, even from two kind of cutthroat competitors like OpenStack and VMware, kind of converge on the same type of architecture and the same types of things. And so now that kind of levels the playing field a little bit more. And so we can compete on areas that have always been our forte, like open source, open standards, the vast, community environment, the foundation and all of its, benefits it brings, especially now becoming, part of, going together with the Linux Foundation, other things. We now are starting to see all of these open source areas, kind of converge into a big umbrella organization that gives people that kind of single location for a solution that they previously went to a vendor like Broadcom or VMware for.
Yep. And I think if you look at the latest results from the OpenStack user survey are out. The user survey report should be out later this year, but that kind of mirrors exactly what Ken is talking about, which is we've seen a dramatic increase in usage of OpenStack for SMBs, which for a very long time only very large companies with big IT teams ran OpenStack, and now we're seeing the opposite of that. People are recognizing that because of the ease of upgrades, because it's operationally more sound and kind of baked, it's a reasonable solution for those small to medium-sized businesses that want an open source and digital sovereign virtualization solution.
I mean, the fact is that even migrating is a huge investment and waste of resources, developer time, money, time itself. With open source, you can just change the vendor or fork the code like we saw with Velky, OpenTofu, OpenSearch, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're seeing in the market is that people are afraid to move to another single vendor open source solution or to another proprietary solution because they'll be right back in the same bucket that they were in with VMware. And the beauty of OpenStack is, and any open source solution that is multi-vendor, is that you can move your workloads to any other company. It provides kind of a safety valve that prevents the exact same thing that happened with VMware from happening to you in the future. So yeah, you're future-proofing, you're making a smart decision. Maybe it's a bit more work on the front end, but I think in the long run, and I know Rackspace's models show this, you end up saving money, a lot of money.
I would also add to that, one of the things that I've talked to Jimmy about this quite a bit, is we talk a lot about the notion of vendor lock-in, right? A vendor owning a customer's, IT infrastructure, either through influence or just being a monoculture inside of that customer. One of the things I talk about a lot is vendor leverage. And you pointed on, and you keyed in onto exactly what I'm talking about. When you have those single vendor open source solutions, kind of the Redis Valky or the Elasticsearch OpenSearch, or any number of additional kind of examples of that, the leverage that vendor can have on you, if it's not a true open source solution, is just as bad as buying into a proprietary product. So one of the things we talk about, and we use the term with our customers, talking about them owning their own destiny. And when they do Rackspace, particularly with they do OpenStack, particularly with Rackspace, we always provide them an off-ramp. They always have the ability to go on their own, to transfer the ownership and operation of all the software to themselves. We don't have any proprietary bits in there. We don't have any secret sauce. We say our secret sauce is that there is no secret sauce. But any of those things allows a customer to take over and run their own infrastructure at any time they so choose. And so it's incumbent on us as a vendor to continuously earn their business. And we've been very successful with that and we continue to be. But just giving that opportunity for customers, that's a very big relief point for, especially now when they see things happening like this, where they know that they can pivot to doing it themselves or pivot to another similar vendor who offers similar solutions, because their technological, infrastructure is not tied to a single vendor or a single, either proprietary software or open source software.
Yeah, and I would tack on one more thing, which is that for organizations that in a sort of geopolitically interesting world, for organizations, perhaps it changes, where they need to hold their data, who they need to hold their data with. On our demo today, during our keynote, we had 5 companies online, or 5 companies doing a demo at the same time. One of them was a small local French company called Vortex. If you have a French company or the French government makes a decision, which they have recently, to keep all the data in country, and you happen to be on another OpenStack provider or another open source provider, it's very easy to move your workloads directly into a small local provider, and there's no love lost. Everybody sort of is helping one another, and I think we saw that play out in our demo on stage this week.
Jimmy, as you rightly mentioned, Gartner predicts that VMware's market share will drop sharply by 2029, and we are hearing names like Nutanix or Proxmox as possible replacements. How do these proprietary options stack up against open solutions like OpenStack?
Yeah, I mean, it's already happening today. The largest banks, and I mean, you mentioned France, and we're in Paris, so the largest banks in France are all running on OpenStack. The French government is running entirely on OpenStack. We've actually got a couple of talks here this week talking about that exact thing. The EU, most of the EU government is now either running on or moving towards OpenStack. It's ready. It's happening, and I think the idea that you would lock yourself into another non-open source vendor at this point and risk the same kind of thing that the VMware situation has been a tidal wave for these organizations. They are overwhelmed by the fact that they have to move their workloads. And you mentioned Nutanix, move everything to Nutanix, and Nutanix could just as easily raise their prices tomorrow. That doesn't happen with OpenStack. And Ken, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
I think that's a good point. Nutanix, well, technically is a fantastic solution, has a lot of things going for it. It's still the same model as VMware. So you're not solving, as you pointed out earlier, you're not solving the actual problem that you're having. A lot of people view their problem with VMware as cost, or the problem with VMware as, something else. But what's interesting is a lot of people learned that their perpetual licenses, and at least what I understood perpetual to mean was forever, were no longer forever. And that's a very, when we talk to a lot of people, they're really mad about stuff like that. And so one of the things you brought up earlier, again, I'm kind of circling back, but at the same time, it's an evergreen discussion point, is open source means that you have the freedom to fork. And so when you go with the true open source solutions, you wouldn't actually need to fork it. But even if you went with one like, Redis and Valkey or one of the others, you have that ability to go your own way. And we've been doing that, for over 12 years with OpenStack at Rackspace. Our private cloud solutions, most of them run in a customer data center on customer hardware that they purchase. And we have in some cases have zero insight, ability, login, activity. They're literally calling us and escalating it to us, for expertise only. And so if that were to stop tomorrow, we'd of course hate to lose their business, but at the same time, there's nothing, if that were to stop tomorrow, they don't have to uninstall anything. They don't have to change anything. And that, again, it goes back to, we have to continuously earn their business. And, our metrics point out to the fact that we're doing a very good job with that. But at the same time, there's always that ability to whether something changes politically, whether something changes, financially, to be able to go that direction and not have to uninstall or find a new solution or anything. And that is becoming an even more, the interesting thing is we've said that since the beginning, but now we have basically, as you said earlier, VMware, making that argument for us without us even having stepped in the door.
Now, if you go back to VMware, they also made changes to their partner network, which has raised a lot of concerns in the ecosystem. How is OpenStack community and its ecosystem foundations fundamentally different in terms of openness and collaboration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was just on October 8th that Google announced that their customers could no longer use their VMware instances in their cloud without paying an additional fee. That simply doesn't exist in the OpenStack ecosystem. And I think a really interesting thing is, as we've seen in these movements that we've been talking about, the VMware situation and the digital sovereignty situation have created all of these brand new businesses in running OpenStack and consulting on OpenStack, running private cloud, public cloud. Partner network is being created from scratch based on open source software. It's the polar opposite of VMware rug pulling their partner network. We can't take away the companies that want to build their business on OpenStack. And, that's an organic thing that's happened. And as the need for open source solutions have risen, we've seen these new companies come out of nowhere, and they're thriving. They're making money. They're helping customers in areas where they need to keep their data in country, or they need to keep their data in continent as it is. I don't know, Ken.
I would say, that's a good point, because my entire career has been built around open source. And, I was at Red Hat around 25 years ago, pre-IPO, and moving forward through that. And even back then, the kind of, we kind of coined this term, co-opetition. And the thing is you're, on the one hand, you might be, I literally had a case where I'd be going in to talk to a customer. I'd be passing people from SUSE or Canonical on the way out. And I know these people. So we're saying hi and everything. And when we go to conferences, we're all hanging out and talking with one another, and we're interacting with each other on IRC, and we're developing together. We're just, we've all picked a slightly different, tack towards our business, whether it's a geographic locality, whether it's, just a different technological base, or Linux distribution. Like, there's a million different ways of doing it. We all differentiate ourselves somewhat, but at the end of the day, like, a win for one is a win for all except for the pocketbook, right? And so it's a little bit antithetical to capitalism, but at the same time, every time, Rackspace figures out how to, deliver operational excellence for OpenStack, Canonical, Vortex and others can just pick that right up. Likewise, whenever someone like a huge competitor like Huawei, makes huge code contributions, we all get to take advantage of those. And so, everyone's work benefits the other. And that's a very interesting environment, right? It was very difficult to get a lot of people to understand that 25 years ago. And I think as we've seen people come from the VMware world now, it's interesting to me how often I'm having to have these conversations that I thought we didn't need to have anymore. But these people haven't been steeped in that open source world, and it's all new to them. And so for them, their competitors were cutthroat competitors, and their vendor competitors were cutthroat competitors. And the same thing was kind of true in the Unix world, right? HP and Sun and SGI all were cutthroat competitors. But if you go back to their origins of their software in the Unix world, that all came through academia, where everyone was sending tapes of their software back and forth for free. So I think the history of open source has always been one of collaboration behind the scenes, and we keep the kind of competition friendly, much like in sport, right? Whether it's, pick your sport, you might see two teams that are bitter rivals, but the players on those teams are actually very good friends. It's their, and so up until game day, you're cooperating, and then on game day, you're competitors.
Yeah, I would also add to that. We saw that play out. So we've been working on this VMware demo with these 5 companies for, I don't know, 3-4 months, something like
that.
We meet bi-weekly, everybody talks, everybody chats, tries to figure out how to make this thing work. And we saw it all play out today. Today was game day, and people were helping each other up to the very last minute this morning during rehearsal. That's open source, and that's the power of open source. And I think that's why it works so well. And it's so, I think I said future-proof already, but it is a better and smarter way to manage your tech business.
Can I feel that open source is no longer a counterbalance to capitalism? In fact, it is actually a great model for free market by creating a supply chain that is not controlled by a single entity, which enables companies to use these products to build specialization and create products, while their developer teams may contribute, may collaborate, but their sales and marketing teams can compete, and it creates a win-win for all. Consumer gets better solutions, and companies get better opportunities to further grow.
Yeah, I think it just moves the lines, right? Like, you can have 2 companies that both build pizzas, but at the end of the day, they're sourcing flour and sugar and cheese and eggs from probably the same farmers, right? Open source, an open source businesses just moves that supply chain a little bit closer upward, right? Where instead of, competing for engineering resources or competing for, computers, you're sharing source code as well. And, and again, everybody ultimately has their own spin on it. And that's what's, they're looking at to differentiate themselves competitively. And some folks add, integrations. Some folks, for Rackspace, I would say our biggest one is our know-how and our knowledge and experience. We think our differentiator is the Racker themselves. And still others decide to put their own software on top or do their own, spin or their own way of doing things. And there's no right or wrong way of doing it. But I think at the end of the day, it exactly as your point, there's a way to make money and have a positive business about it, but there's also a way to do that where you're not harming your customer by cutting it so low, you're cutting the tree off so close to the ground that they can't, go a different direction if they need to.
There are a lot of organizations who are in a very early stage of their VMware migration journey. What advice do you folks have for them, both from a technical and a community perspective?
Sure. I think it depends on what your internal setup looks like. How many experts do you have on site? Have they worked with open source before? Or are they only VMware users? And then from there, you determine whether or not you need a consulting company to help you make that decision. But I think looking towards a open source solution with a healthy ecosystem and multiple companies committing upstream is what any user should be looking for. Because again, going back to the mechanics example, it's like, don't put yourself in the exact same boat that got you priced out of VMware. You want to look for a company that can help guide you to a reasonable open source solution. And as Ken pointed out earlier, if you need to bail for whatever reason, you can move to another company that provides the same open source solution. Or maybe you just take it all in-house. So you want to sort of take a step back and take a look at the landscape. And I think especially take another look at the open source landscape that you haven't looked at for a very long time, and see what solutions are best going to fit your use case, your organization, your growth model, things like that, to ensure that you're future-proofing and providing yourself with a sustainable technological solution moving forward.
Well, I think Jimmy put it extremely well, so there's not a whole lot I can add. But one thing I would just sort of frame it, this concept of, we talk all the time, if you talk to somebody who's building a data center, it doesn't matter if they're doing VMware, OpenStack, wherever, we all try to work around single points of failure. right? That's why you don't have one network card in the back. That's why you don't have one ISP in a data center. That's why you don't have one power, connection to the back of a modern server. But at the same time, if we've only done everything with one software vendor, that's a different single point of failure. And what OpenStack or any open source solution gives you is, it kind of takes away that single point of failure from a software infrastructure, point of view. Whereas, you may have a single partner that you develop on, but you can always, again, do it yourself or go to somebody else. And whereas if you're doing something with a proprietary solution, you are literally beholden to any decision they make. And as soon as your goals diverge from theirs, as soon as you're no longer aligned in interest, they're going to choose them, right? I mean, that, like everyone does. You choose you put your own interests first when you have to. And when your interests, and you talked earlier about, partner network changes and other changes, Broadcom has really changed a lot of VMware's direction, and that doesn't align with a great amount of their ecosystem. And so at that point, you have to look back and say, how do I get either back in alignment with what Broadcom wants to do, which is one choice, or how do I pick a direction where that kind of problem doesn't exist? And open source is an area where that really doesn't exist in the same way. So again, I think the earliest thing that we said today was you have to consider the problem you're actually solving. The VMware to OpenStack problem isn't a technological problem. Migrating stuff is really cool and we can do fun demos, but it's not a difficult it's not a difficult problem to solve. Re-architecting an infrastructure from being VMware based to being OpenStack based is not a difficult thing. Reorienting an operations team and retraining them can be difficult, but it's not fundamentally something that's happened in the past, right? We're not running the same thing we ran 30 years ago. And so, that's happened before. The question is how do you realign your thinking to say, hey, how do I not only get myself out of this current predicament, but eliminate this whole entire class of problems from existing in the first place? And that is really the focus of when I go talk to, customers and potential people, partners and people who talk about moving. That's my message to them is you need to reorient your thinking about eliminating this type of problem. Thinking, how do I not have this type of problem exist versus just being, tactical and addressing the immediate issue because, moving to Nutanix, great. You've solved the VMware problem, but in 5 years, Nutanix jacks up the price like Jimmy, said earlier could happen, which I agree could happen, probably will happen. In fact, they've already committed to saying they're going to jack up their prices. Right. You're really not getting out of that problem at all. You're just readdressing it just to a different, you've changed allegiance, but you're doing the same, you're having the same problem you had in the first place.
Jimmy, Ken, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your insights. It's clear that open infrastructure isn't just a cost-saving alternative. It is becoming a strategic foundation for sovereignty and long-term innovation. And for those watching, if you are evaluating your VMware migration strategy, make sure to check out Rackspace and the OpenInfra Foundation for guidance and solutions. And don't forget to subscribe to TFR, like this video, and share it with your teams. Thanks for watching.